Hi everyone, I'm Ava, and today I want to talk to you about Dutch directness versus American indirectness. Because let me tell you, when I moved to the Netherlands, this is something I absolutely had to get used to. And I'm not talking about the Dutch directness part. Moving here made me confused about why Americans say things the way they do. I think the real question here is, why don't Americans ever say what they mean? When I heard about Dutch directness in the past, I braced myself to be prepared for people asking me questions that were totally unexpected or for people almost sounding rude. But instead, I was more surprised by how I started questioning my own experiences and how I would say things. Because over the last 4 years and all the times that I've visited and since I moved here last year, I've noticed that sometimes I can be so indirect about things that people are actually confused about what I'm trying to say. So while it is the case that Dutch people are direct, and I like that, even though I had to get used to it and it definitely was a culture shock for me, in this video, I actually wanted to talk about how sometimes the way Americans say things can actually seem a little out there. I think the only way in which I can actually tell you what I mean is by giving some examples. In this video, I wanted to give you 5 conversation examples. I'm going to talk about how Dutch people would respond or how Dutch people would say things versus how Americans say things. And as always, I would love to hear what you guys think about it and what your experiences has been when it comes to everyday conversations. So number 1 has to do with when someone asks you if you would like something more or something else. So let's say, for instance, someone asks you if you want more coffee. A Dutch person might probably respond with no thank you or nee bedankt if they're speaking Dutch. And that is really direct. It's to the point, but it sounds really rude to me as an American. Because in the US, we would hardly ever say no thank you. We've found ways around this no thank you because the no just sounds too direct. It sounds too impolite to us. Even though it actually answers the question, it gets to the point. But what we would say is, I'm good or I'm perfect. And what's really funny about this is I've said this in English when speaking to Dutch people. And quite often people don't know what I mean because it sounds so positive that they think it means yes. So one time my father-in-law actually asked me if I wanted more coffee and I said, I'm good. And he gave me more coffee because he just thought it sounded so positive. He thought I said yes in my strange American way. But no, when an American says I'm good or I'm perfect, it means they don't need anything more. And sometimes it's easier when we say, no thanks, I'm good. But I often just say I'm good sometimes, and I can totally see how that's a little bit confusing. I also once confused a cashier at a Scotch and soda. He asked me if I wanted a bag, and I said, I'm good. And he looked at me like I had been smoking the good stuff all day. He really thought I was high as a kite. No, I was completely sober and I was just saying no thank you. Okay, number 2 has to do with when someone asks you to do something that's quite difficult. Well, a Dutch person, if it's not possible, might just tell you it's not possible. They might just say dat mag niet. And the conversation ends right there because, you know, it's just not possible. So why bother? They're just gonna give it to you straight. An American, again, will find their way around it. They will tell you that maybe it doesn't look promising, that maybe they will try and give it their best. And it's up to you to figure out what they actually mean by it. Do they mean that it'll actually get done? Do they mean that it won't get done? We'll never know. Number 3 has to do with when someone wants to give you constructive criticism. So let's say you wrote some poetry, right? Maybe you're someone who writes poetry and you're showing this to a friend who normally appreciates your poetry. And let's say you show this friend another poem of yours. Now, a Dutch friend might just say, hey, this is not your best work, if that's the case. But an American will surely convey that to you in the most confusing way possible. An American might say something like, oh, the approach you've taken here is so different. Or, oh, this one's interesting. And let me tell you something right here. This is a tip for all the non-Americans watching this. If an American tells you something is interesting, it is most likely 9 out of 10 times, I mean like 95, 99% of the time, it is not good. When they tell you that it is interesting, it's not interesting in a good way. No, it's not. It's not. I'm sorry. I know it's a whole other meaning of the word interesting, but it is what it is. And we also like to say it with this kind of intonation. So this will help you figure out whether an American is actually trying to say something is interesting or not. So when I say, oh, that's interesting, I genuinely mean that's interesting, and it could be either negative or positive, but it's pretty neutral. But if I say, oh, that's interesting, it is so not good. That's not a good thing. No, it's a very bad thing. Number 4. Okay, I have to say, this one is a little bit extreme, but I had to include it because even though it's so extreme, Americans will recognize it, and it's often used as a joke. It has to do when something not so great has happened to your parents. So let's say one time you got really drunk and got a starfish painted on your face. Or what are some other silly things that you could do? You're wearing a shirt that's completely unflattering. Okay, so in scenarios like this, Americans will be extremely non-confrontational. This is not even being polite. This is just things got so awkward that we don't know how to react. And so we're indirect, we're non-confrontational, and we say things that make no sense in that scenario. So I don't know if you are not American or not an English speaker, whether this is something that might be familiar in your culture. And like I said, it's really a part of our culture. You'll see it in movies sometimes or on TV shows. Okay, so let's take this example of you getting a starfish tattooed on your face. Okay, it's pretty noticeable, and maybe it's not something you would do, okay, as a person. Your friend hasn't seen you in a while since you got this starfish tattooed on your face. And let's say you see that friend. Now your friend, if they're Dutch, will look at you and probably point out the obvious, very obvious fact that you have a starfish on your face. They might comment on it. They might say something like, the starfish looks good, or the starfish looks bad, or why would you do that? Why the hell would you get a starfish on your face? That makes no sense. It looks terrible, and now you're stuck with it for the rest of your life until you die. But an American will do no such thing. No. An American will find ways to beat around the bush. They might say something completely unrelated like, oh my God, did you do something different? I don't know what it is. Is it your hair? Did you get a haircut? And although this is obviously exaggerated, it just goes to show that how indirectness is part of our culture, so much that this is a trope on television. And I think it comes from a place of not wanting to offend anybody, so you'll probably see milder versions, like, I think when you're wearing something not so flattering kind of scenario, or you get a bad haircut, I think Americans tend to be more non-confrontational about it, only because they don't want to hurt your feelings. So I do think it comes from a good place, but I just think it's really funny how Dutch culture seems to be very different. Like, I don't think I've had more friends or acquaintances comment on my appearance in the US in my whole time living in the US than I have had here in the past year that I've lived here. And finally, number 5, I would not be able to do a video about Dutch directness versus American indirectness without talking about the infamous "how are you?" So in the US, instead of saying hello, we'll often just say how are you? Okay, I've talked about this before, but what I haven't talked about is when someone actually needs to be asked how they're doing, the person will respond in a really positive way. Let me illustrate what I mean. Let's say you've had a bad day at work and you go into the bathroom and you're crying. Like, bear with me here. This is just an example. So you're crying in the bathroom and someone walks in and asks you how you're doing. This is a friend, you know this person, you guys are friends in the real sense, not just Facebook friends or Instagram friends. You guys are real life friends, colleagues and friends. And now this friend asks you how you're doing, and if you are Dutch, you might respond with, oh man, I've had a really crappy day. X, Y, and Z happened. So-and-so said this to me, or, whatever reason. If you're American, your first instinct, no matter how hard you are crying your eyes out, will be to look up, even with your face all covered in mascara. You will look up and just smile and say, I'm good, how are you? It's because we are so trained to do this. Anyway, that was my experience moving to the Netherlands and learning about my own American indirectness and also getting used to Dutch directness, which, for the record, I love.